I feel like playing an Elder Scrolls game. Nah, too advanced. Still too advanced. That's more like it. Welcome to Obscuros Ludos. I play obscure games. These games are completely silent, so royalty-free tunes rescue me! That's better. In the mid-2000s, phones were getting smarter. Not smart, but smarter, and in particular, games on phones were booming, particularly in poorer countries where phones were common but single-purpose game systems rare. Nokia released a gaming-optimized phone, the N-Gage, which was powerful for its time with a small array of 3D games, but the N-Gage is clunky and badly designed, so it was a bit of a flash in the pan. Other phones, what we would now call feature phones, were nowhere near as powerful, but were far more plentiful, so games on them spread like wildfire. Not wanting to miss out, Bethesda's parent company, ZeniMax Media, pushed one of their other acquisitions, Vir2L Studios, to make Elder Scrolls games for the platform. Those games became the Elder Scrolls Travels series, of which there are 4: Stormhold, Dawnstar, Shadowkey, and Oblivion Mobile. Well, technically Oblivion Mobile wasn't marketed as an Elder Scrolls Travels game, but it's usually lumped in because it was a mobile game. Shadowkey is the black sheep here, as it was for the powerful N-Gage and is far, far more advanced than the others in spite of being released before Oblivion Mobile. It could have a whole episode of its own, so I'm not going to talk about it here. As these were phone games, only Shadowkey was ever actually sold in a box. To get the others, you would visit their website, here archived, unfortunately incompletely, by the wonderful archive.org Wayback Machine, and get instructions for your particular handset and your particular carrier. Nowadays there are emulators, but they tend to be a bit finicky. I had to fix K-Emulator to make Stormhold and Dawnstar work correctly at all. Because of the complication of actually getting mobile games at the time, they were never advertised well, and maintained popularity mostly through the carriers pushing them themselves. But anyway, eventually you figure out how to throw $5 into the void and buy a game, and what do you get? A masterful reimagining of the Elder Scrolls in a resource-limited environment? Well, no. We'll start with Stormhold and Dawnstar. They use the same engine and are quite similar games, so I'll explain them both at once. In the Elder Scrolls Travels Stormhold, you find yourself in Dawnstar City Center, which is little more than a square of tunnels with some characters to talk to. The game's of the style of 1980s RPGs, with orthogonal movement along tiles which form a maze, using simple pseudo-3D rendering to present an ineffective illusion of 3D space. In each of the 4 cardinal directions from this main hub is a dungeon maze full of enemies. You use a pretty standard array of fantasy weapons and Elder Scrolls-ish spells to battle them, but after clearing out 1 or 2 dungeons, are likely to find yourself so overleveled that simply spamming whatever weapon or spell you're most comfortable with will easily kill anything. That's a good thing, since the spell system involves cycling, one by one, through every spell you know, while the enemy murders you, making single-attack spamming the only ergonomic thing to do. There are very few sprites, so a lot of enemies look the same as each other, and the battle system has a lot of randomness to it, so the distinction between the enemies essentially doesn't matter anyway. Impressively for a phone game, enemies are persistent and don't respawn. But this does mean that there's a limit on the total amount of experience and items available in the entire game. From enemies or in chests, you can find items which let you recover health, magic, or stamina. Stamina is completely pointless since you recover stamina much more quickly than you could possibly lose it. However, all these restorative items are eclipsed by the most important item in the game, the Warp Rune. The warp mechanic allows you to go back and forth between the dungeons and a central hub, using either a warp rune or a permanent warp point found within the dungeon. The warp mechanic is critical for a number of reasons. First and foremost, because you have a limited inventory, thus you'll be spending most of the game filling up your inventory with worthless spoils, warping back to the hub, selling it all, then warping back to the dungeon again. Also, warp crystals cost the same as restorative items, and you can always recover your health or magic in town, so warping subsumes restorative items entirely. Even without warp, you can camp anywhere, and while your camp can be interrupted by monsters, that's fairly rare. And even when it happens, it's trivial to either run away or simply defeat the enemies with partial rest. Between warping and camping, the only purpose to restorative items is that they're slightly faster than the alternative. You can also save anywhere, appropriately for a mobile game, but you only get one save slot, so should be careful not to save while you're backed into a corner. In each dungeon, you find one gift item, such as a blanket or leg weights, and finding gift items as well as progress through the dungeons unlocks further dungeons. In each cardinal direction from the hub, there are 9 dungeons, which unlock in 3 sets of 3. The gift items aren't just used to unlock dungeons, though. They're also used as, well, gifts. There are 4 trainers who will train you in the various game skills, 1 skill for each type of weapon or magic, as a favor in exchange for these gifts. Many of the gifts are only wanted by certain trainers, so you have to read their dialogue carefully to know who wants what. That being said, the training mechanic is largely useless, since you also train each skill by using the skill. Training can, however, bring you from skill level 0, at which you can't use the skill at all, to skill level 1, at which you can train it yourself like any other skill. The plot is tied to your progress through the dungeons, although the only in-game explanation for how the two are related is the natural passage of time. After fully exploring about 30 dungeons, you unlock the final challenge, and upon winning are rewarded with a paragraph of plain text. Okay, while Stormhold and Dawnstar are similar, they're not identical. In Stormhold, you're in, well, Stormhold. The Elder Scrolls I Arena established Stormhold as a city in Black Marsh, home of the reptilian Argonians, though Vir2L couldn't be bothered to actually draw any Argonians for this game. You play as a prisoner in Stormhold Prison, but the game never explains why you're in prison in the first place. The enemies you find are prisoners, guards, and overseers, all of which you kill with no remorse, so I assume you're in for mass murder. Wait, am I the bad guy? Wait! Is this supposed to be an Argonian? Is this supposed to be an Argonian? It looks like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly, if The Fly had instead been the lamprey. Oh yes, this handsome fellow is Varus, the warden of Stormhold Prison, who maintains the whole establishment as a labor camp, mining for crystals. The mining is the excuse this game uses for dungeons appearing over time. The crystals are warp items and restorative items, as well as a sort of unit of barter, as there's no currency in the prison. There's a guy who trades items including crystals for crystals, so he's a useful source of warp crystals, and there's Helga, our warp point in the core. After working our way through enough colorfully named dungeons, Charred Walls, Mad Knife Halls, Dignity's Tomb, Priest Hole, we find Varus and fight him. 2 seconds later, after killing him, we recover the Stormhold Crystal, which has unspecified but important plot powers. Or is it the Storm Crystal? Game can't make up its mind. With Varus dead, we liberate the prison and... wait. I mean, they were still prisoners. Surely they committed crimes. Why did I liberate them? Again, am I the bad guy? Dawnstar is set in, well, Dawnstar, which has been established to be in the frozen white north of Skyrim. Stormhold was set in mine, so the tunnely look almost makes sense, but Dawnstar just begs for open fields and sky. The governor of Dawnstar has asked us to root out a traitor from among 4 heroes. Each hero is found in one of the dungeons and bizarrely serves as a warp point that we can always warp back to, so they may as well have just been in town, maybe in jail or something. They also serve as trainers, which were in the core in Stormhold, but the gift items are far better traded for information, not training. To figure out who the traitor is, we have to gather rumors from Eustacia, Dawnstar's Helga, and then ask each hero a question. Each question tells us about one hero's interaction with one rumor according to another hero, who will be lying if they're the traitor. In short, what they've added to Stormhold is Blue and Clue. The board game Clue, that is. Cluedo in most of the world. Anyway, once you've gotten 2 rumors, if you're clever about what questions you ask, you should always be able to form a series of logical inferences which are satisfiable with only one answer, and thus can identify the traitor, which you do from the main menu. If you misidentify the traitor, you instantly lose. If you identify correctly, you have to protect the city from their troops. That battle is annoying, since they win seemingly if they kill any townsperson, but you can't actually see the whole town, so you have to run around hoping to catch them before they catch anyone else. The final boss is the dreaded Gehennoth. The Gehennoth was also added as a random encounter when you camp, presumably to nerf the overpowered camping mechanic, but you spend most of the game so overleveled even he's no real threat, whether as camp boss or final boss. When you win, bizarrely, the game tells you that the governor gave you 3,000 gold, which is nothing compared to the 7,000 I already collected in the game, and isn't much use now anyway, since the game is over. And that's that. Game over. Oblivion Mobile is a whole different story. As you might expect, it's a downport of Oblivion. In fact, it was advertised on a flyer in the box with a retail copy of Oblivion. On the phone, it just calls itself Elder Scrolls. That's not confusing, but it is Oblivion. By the way, I played Oblivion Mobile on a real phone, not an emulator, which is why it looks a bit softer. Oblivion takes a top-down isometric approach, which has the annoying consequence of crooked joystick syndrome. Up on the D-pad is up and right in the game, etc, etc. Also, it has this timing bug that makes movement get stuck on every emulator and real phone I've tested it on. But that's the nature of phone games, they tend to be a bit finicky. I don't know if this is a real bug, or just a bug that manifests on emulators and modern phones. Anyway, I fixed that bug to give it a fair chance, and I'll provide a link to the fixed version in the description below. The biggest problem with the perspective is just the screen size and how it scrolls, though. Off-screen enemies can attack you, but the screen only scrolls when you reach the very edge of the screen, so it's often necessary to fight across the great divide of the edge of the screen. Like Stormhold and Dawnstar, beyond that it mostly involves clicking attack a lot until you win. It does follow the plot of Oblivion. More precisely, it follows a very specific set of plot elements with little to tie them together, but being jerked from location to location. The protagonist doesn't even get the benefit of a name, he's just called Champion. We start as a prisoner, like in Stormhold, actually. Coincidence, when the Emperor, escaping cultist, tries to escape through a secret passage through the sewers, senselessly located in the only occupied prison cell. But he's killed on the way. We, the prisoner, are the only survivor, so he gives us the Amulet of Kings to convince others of what's happened, and we escape through the passage after stealing his clothes to disguise the fact that we're a prisoner. We have an array of spells and weapons at our disposal, but one is critical. Cure poison. I have never seen a game with more devastating poison than this one. If you're poisoned and don't have the ability to cure it, you will die. And there are poisoning enemies in the very first area of the game. So in short, choose a class that comes with the cure poison spell, or die. Anyway, as we escape out the secret passage, a civilian tells us about a nest of goblins, introducing the side quest mechanic. This game has 4 whole side quests. I know it's exactly that many because the in-game help says so, and they're dull and not worth it. To complete this one, we have to kill 3 goblins and curse isometric movement down this hallway. Yeehaw. We escape the sewers into town, where we're immediately accosted by Joffrey, who's also in cosplay as the Emperor. Why do you wear the robes of the Emperor? Why do you wear the robes of the Emperor, Joffrey? Why do you wear the robes of the Emperor? Explain that. Anyway, we convince him that we're not evil. He tells us that the only surviving heir is the Emperor's illegitimate son, Martin, who's gone gallivanting to hell, Oblivion. So we follow him to hell, tell him what's what, help him kill some baddies, collect some Daedric Scrota, I guess, and close the Hellgate. And then we return to town and condemn the cultists, while all suspiciously dressed in the same robes, but just ignore that. The overall plot is a hollow version of Oblivion's. Mr. Bad wants to eat the world, he's got a cult to open the gates to hell, the Emperor's bloodline has magic inbred power to stop it along with the Amulet of Kings, so let's work together and stop Mr. Bad. Why we want to do that as a prisoner isn't clear, but whatever, let's stop Mr. Bad. This game completely railroads you. You can never go backwards, you can never revisit an area, and there are only a couple optional areas in the entire game. When you start a new quest, it gives you an opportunity to buy supplies, and your only opportunity to save, before continuing on, but it's just a menu, which you can't return to voluntarily. So not only, like in Stormhold and Dawnstar, are there a limited number of enemies, thus a limited amount of experience, and a limited number of items, thus a limited economy, but there's also a limited number of opportunities to shop and save the game. Along with the disjointed plot, that really helps to cement the feeling of just being dragged through a story against your will. Oh yeah, the story. Our first stop is the cultist hideaway in the sewers, because the top cultist has stolen the Amulet of Kings. Thanks, Joffrey. Good job losing it, hero. He immediately pieces out, so we kill his henchman and grab his book. It turns out to be instructions on teleporting oneself to a paradise realm, so with Martin's help to decode it, we go on 3 fetch quests. 1, some random crystal with no further relevance than being a fetch quest, the Azura Star, guarded by a troop of dancing trolls. 2, the blood of a god, which turns out to actually be the blood of a king who ascended to godhood, but let's not argue Christology and the hypostatic union here. 3, the Grand Welkin Stone, which, like the Azura Star, is just a magic doodad with no explanation for why it's important. We have to solve some extremely simple puzzles, flip levers from east to west, return the sun totem before the moon totem, but in each case, the game actually railroads you into the right solution. Only the correct item is interactable, so it's impossible to screw up the puzzles. Great job on the puzzle design, guys. Anyway, we bring back all this crap, we confront the top cultist in his paradise realm and retrieve the Amulet of Kings. We discover that he's already released Mr. Bad, so we have to use the power of Martin's inbreeding and the Amulet of Kings to stop him. That is to say, we have to make it to a door before a bunch of enemies kill us. When we get there, we are rewarded with a paragraph of text in the final credits. Oblivion Mobile is the shortest of these games, but only because it drags you through the plot at lightning pace. At least, unlike Stormhold and Dawnstar, it does have a plot. Oblivion Mobile might be worth playing just to see how they massacred the source material, but neither it nor Stormhold or Dawnstar advances the overall plot of the Elder Scrolls in any interesting way, and none of them are actually fun to play at all. And to make a comparative point, there actually are good games for feature phones. The phone downport of BioShock is incredible, and some of the Tomb Raider games for phones are perfectly passable Prince of Persia knockoffs. Plus, of course, there are plenty of decent original games on the platform. The platform isn't the problem here. The Elder Scrolls games for feature phones just aren't good games. But they are games, and I don't regret playing them. I've played them so you don't have to. I hope you enjoyed this look at some obscure games. If you did, do leave a like below, and if you want to see more obscure games, subscribe. If you'd like to see my full playthrough of these games with commentary, there are links in the description below, as well as links to some of the other obscure games I've played. If you have a suggestion for an obscure game you'd like to see me play or review, or just want to say hi, leave a comment. Thank you for watching Obscura Manete.